realfaith.org.au.
My husband said to me, what are you going to do with your career, Sarah? And I said to him, well, I know that I don't want to go back and work in the hospital system. And he said, you know what you need to do? You need to go and do your midwifery in a developing country. And I said, yes, that's always been my heart and my passion.
Welcome to Real Faith, conversations about the impact faith has on our lives and the challenges we go through, helping us today and giving us hope for tomorrow. That's real people, real life, and real faith with Eric Scatterbo.
Mother Teresa was quoted as saying that when you look at the masses and all their needs, you will feel overwhelmed. But if you look at one person in need, you will make a start. And that's more or less what happened to Sara David after she made a trip to Papua New Guinea and learned about a woman who died shortly after giving birth because she didn't have access to quality health care. Sara was inspired to make a start and help, and that's exactly what she did. We'll find out the exciting ways the Lord is using her to make a difference as she shares her story with us today. Sara David, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be here.
So glad to have you with us, and you're joining us from Perth today.
Sunny Perth. It's gorgeous.
Very good.
Gorgeous day.
Glad to hear that. And I just wanted to chat with you about that quote from Mother Teresa. That is so true about human nature that when we think about all the needs in the world, you can be overwhelmed. But when you think about one person and helping one person, that's what really kind of makes a difference. Is that the case for you?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it just hits the mark. It's that, your neighbor. So that person that you can see, that person that's in front of you, that you can speak with, that you can actually, influence, show care or show kindness or walk alongside or whatever. I just think it is such a powerful image. And for me personally, it's helped me so much as I look at the needs around the world. Yeah.
Okay, and we're going to find out about that one person that tugged your heart and inspired you to do what you're doing today. But first, we're going to go back and find out your story and what led up to you having your heart tugged. It all started back in South Africa. Is that right?
Yeah. So I grew up, I did some of my growing up in South Africa. And when I was about 8 or 9, I remember I was riding my bike one day and I saw this little girl lying on the side of the road, and she had obviously come off her bike, and I went over to her to see what was wrong and if I could help her. And she'd got her toes caught in it's the days before we had bike helmets and, all the occupational health and safety around riding. She was riding barefoot.
Oh, wow.
And she had got her toes caught in the wheel.
Oh,
and so
in the
she
spokes.
Really, that's right, in the spokes. And so she had really messed up her feet. And she was sitting by the side of the road and she was crying, and obviously there was blood and everything. And she also spoke a different language. She spoke Afrikaans and I was English. So I tried to just understand what was happening for her and where I could take her. And thankfully, her house was just a few houses down. So I managed to help her hobble along, and I took her and I knocked on this door. And her big burly father answered the door and sort of handed her over to him. And I remember just feeling a great sense of like, gee, I've really helped someone. I stopped, I asked what she needed, and then I managed to get her to help. So even though I didn't bind up her wounds, I remember just that feeling of like I've really made a difference for that little girl. And from then on, we used to see each other and wave at each other on the bus or whatever. And I thought, caring for other people is really good. It makes me feel good.
So from such a young age, you already kind of had that feeling of wanting to help.
Yeah. And I also, I then then after that, I remember noticing that, like if my dad had cut himself or, needed a Band-Aid, I was always the one who wanted to go to the first aid kit.
See, I'm the one that goes the other way.
I was totally drawn. No, it was give me blood and guts or pus or give me the tweezers. Get the thorns out of, feet
my goodness.
or
you
whatever.
You are much needed in the world.
I used to just love that. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, and of course, alluding to what you become, a nurse, that's obviously a great quality to have.
Yeah.
Okay, but we want to go back to your childhood. What was childhood like? Was it a positive atmosphere?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there were, when I reflect on my childhood, it was, grew up, those early growing up days in South Africa was very conservative. Mm-hmm. It was at the peak of apartheid.
An injustice, and you're against injustice.
Absolutely. And, I didn't know it then. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what injustice was. I didn't even know what apartheid was when I was a young girl growing up. But I remember that I just loved we had a maid, and her name was Evelina. And Evelina was, she was warm, she was soft.
Was she black?
She was black. Mm-hmm. But I remember, she lived in a little sort of a unit that was next to our house on our property. Mm-hmm. And I remember I used to love going into her room, which was not really allowed, but I used to sort of sneak in there, and then I'd love to sit up on her bed and just see how she lived. And, everything was always so neat and clean, and there was this distinctive smell. And I just loved the African people. I just loved them. But, we had a very privileged life because we were white. So we had access to, education and good health care and all of those things. But I could see that there were, poor black people around.
I'm just curious to know, how did you react personally when you learned about apartheid, which was systematic racism? What was your reaction?
Well, the first time that I realized what it was when I was 10. And we'd just moved to Perth. Oh. And I came to school here, primary school. And I remember that in the classroom, there were some Indian people in our class. Now, we didn't have that in South Africa. It was all white. Mm-hmm. And I remember as well that some of the kids, when they found out I was from South Africa, they called me a racist. Oh. And I remember feeling very undignified and, well, I was indignant. That's rather the word. Mm-hmm. I was indignant, and I just couldn't believe what they were saying about me and my country, where I came from. And so I was shocked, and I denied it, actually, because I didn't realize what an injustice it was that hadn't sort of entered into my thinking, my growing mind. And then when I went to high school here in Perth, there was a lot in the media about, Desmond Tutu, about Nelson Mandela and their fight for freedom. Mm-hmm. And I remember just being glued to this, because in South Africa, we never even saw this on television. Oh. We actually grew up in quite an oppressed society that they only had television in 1975. Oh. And it was state controlled. Mm-hmm. So they controlled everything. They controlled everything in the media. Mm-hmm. And so for the first time, we were seeing pictures of what was happening in South Africa that we had no idea were going on.
Oh, how ironic that you grew up in South Africa and didn't even know the plight of black people in your home country. And it wasn't until you got to Australia that you learned about the injustice.
That's right.
Remember that reaction?
I was a child. But remember, I was a child.
Yeah.
Yes. So I wasn't, wasn't on my radar,
Yeah, you're not thinking about politics and political systems when you're 8 years old.
That's right.
Most people anyway.
Yeah. so there were these like emerging questions that were formulating, and this realization that, oh my goodness, this apartheid, it's segregation and it's racist and it's oppressive, and I've been part of that, and I'm a white person and I've benefited from that. But the Black Africans, they have, there's been this incredible injustice against them. And then to make matters even more interesting, when I was 15, we then moved back to South Africa.
Oh.
Because we were only here temporarily with my dad's work. He was a mining engineer with the Argyle Diamond Mine up north of Western Australia. And at the end of our 5-year tenure, my parents decided that, no, we wanted to go back to South Africa. And I went back kicking and screaming to finish the last 2 years of high school. And this was in the 80s, the late 80s. And of course, this was the time where the ANC was really rearing up.
African National Congress, ANC?
That's right. And that's right. And their terrorist sort of arm really took over. And so every day there were disruptions and there were bombs that went off, and there was a lot of fear going on. And I was in a very, very legalistic school, and I just felt oppressed. I remember You
personally?
Yeah. I just wanted to break free, because if you spoke out at the government, you could be imprisoned.
Oh.
You were not allowed to read certain books because if you were seen to be anti the government, you could just be thrown into prison and just left there, with no charges. So that was happening. So there was a lot of fear. And I remember there was also, we had a young man, a young African man who was at our church, and he was trying to study. And in the townships, and the townships were the areas, the zones where the Africans were kept, and they were not allowed out of those zones. There were curfews on. And he was really afraid this one time because there was necklacing happening in the townships. And necklacing was where they, the other Africans would get people that they felt were not on board with their terrorist activities.
Oh, so they view them as traitors?
View them as traitors. They would capture them, put car tires around their body. So imprison them in car tires and then set the tires alight. Oh. And they called it necklacing. Yeah, it was horrific.
Yeah.
And this was going on, and this young man was really afraid. And so my father said to him, you come and stay at our house, which was against the law.
Oh.
You could not have a Black person stay in your house if they didn't have a pass. And of course, there was a curfew going on as well. And I remember really admiring my dad and my mum for doing this, to taking this Black person into their home. And it was against the law, We had to be all hush-hush about it, just so that he could be safe. So he stayed there for a couple of weeks. Yeah, so all of this was going on.
Yeah.
And, but it was really only because of my experience in Australia and being confronted deeply about this issue of apartheid, that this was not right, that when I went back to South Africa and then, living amongst this turmoil and this sort of crisis, was the beginning of the end of apartheid, really, in the late 80s.
Our guest today is Sara David in Perth, who's sharing the events in her life that have shaped her into who she is today. We'll hear more of Sara's story when we return, right here on Real Faith.
The Word for Today is Australia's most widely read daily devotional, designed to give you practical teaching to keep you focused on your relationship with Jesus. Read it online or subscribe to the free printed edition at thewordfortoday.com.au.
You're listening to Real Faith, conversations with real people about how God works in their lives. If you want to know more about integrating faith into your life, our website is realfaith.org.au. Just go to the website and you'll find helpful articles about the impact faith can have on your life. Once again, that's realfaith.org.au.
Welcome back. I'm Eric Scatabo, and today I'm chatting with Sara David in Perth, who's sharing the events in her life that have shaped her into who she is today. Before the break, we heard about how she grew up in South Africa, but didn't really understand the injustice of the apartheid system until she moved to Australia and it was pointed out to her. Next, we'll hear about her spiritual background and about her life after she moved back to South Africa.
Well, my mum became a Christian when she was 30 and I was 8 years old. So when I was 8, it seemed to be, that real sort of like a crucible of things that happened for me. And life changed a lot. So all of a sudden, Mum gave up smoking cigarettes and she was going to church every Sunday. And it was at that point, she told me what had happened and that she now was a follower of Jesus and that Jesus lived in her heart. And I said to her that I wanted that. Absolutely. I wanted Jesus to live in my heart. And so we said a little prayer and I felt Jesus move into my heart. And I sort of like it was this awakening, but it was something that I had this inherent knowing because a lot of my really young childhood, there was a lot of fear. I was terrified of the dark. I was terrified of burglars.
Because of the crime in South Africa?
Yeah, crime in South Africa, but also, my parents were very strict. They weren't particularly, we had everything that we needed, but they weren't demonstratively very loving and hugging and, Yeah. And so, I just used to hate those night times because I used to feel so afraid. But now that I knew Jesus, from the age of 8, I used to just call on Jesus. He was my friend, He was my friend.
So a deep personal relationship with Jesus.
Absolutely. Yeah. Intimately. Just every day walking with him. Yeah.
And then at 16 years old, you met your husband-to-be. Is that right?
Yeah, so after we returned to South Africa, I got very involved in the Northfield Methodist Church, just in the town where I was. Very involved in youth there, and I went to a confirmation class, so became confirmed. So, we didn't do the full immersion baptism, but it was the confirmation. And at one of those leadership camps, I met Richard. So he was 5 years older than me at the time. I mean, we were just friends initially, but very involved in youth and leading youth and going on camps. And I just absolutely loved it. I was in my element, part of a fantastic youth at the church. We were mentoring young people. And then after 18 months of being back in South Africa, my dad said, right, we're packing up and going back to Australia.
Oh.
And
never a dull moment.
Never a dull moment. My world really, really fell apart then. It was just before my final sort of year 12 exams. I'd met this guy, Richard, who I was madly in love with. And now my parents were going back to Australia. And I was devastated. So it was a very, very difficult time. I spoke to my parents and they said that I could stay in South Africa, go to university. So I went for a year, and Richard was finishing up his master's degree at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. And I started a year in human movement studies, but was all over the place. And sort of towards the end of that year, Richard was preparing to go to the army the next year because that was part of your conscription in South Africa. And I just really, I think it was probably the first time where I started to really hear God, that still small voice. And I could hear him saying, you need to go to Australia and be with your family. Very painful decision because I knew there was going to be many years of separation from Richard. But that's what I did. So
But that's kind of how you know if a relationship is going to last.
yeah, and at that time I didn't quite know that
You don't like
was
it at the
going to.
time,
Yeah,
but it
Yeah.
tells you, does absence make the heart grow fonder or out of sight, out of mind?
yeah, exactly.
And so you've been married how many years now?
We've been married 30 years.
So I guess
Just had our 30th.
it's taken.
Yes.
So then what happened next in your life?
So coming to Australia, it was tough. So even though I had been here for 5 years, I don't know, there's something around those later teen years, you know, and those friendships that you develop that it makes it's very hard to fit in again. And I just felt like a fish out of water. I just couldn't connect with those high school friends that I'd had in junior high, but I wasn't really an adult yet. So it was a very difficult time for me. I wanted to study physiotherapy. My parents had said to me, don't ever be a nurse, because my father had been
But I like blood.
I know, and he had been in hospital and he'd seen a nurse having to clean up feces, and he said, you don't want to be a nurse, you don't want to be cleaning up after people. And so that had put me off. But God had other ideas. And at a tennis club, I spoke to this lady, and she was a nurse, and she just told me what a wonderful profession it was. And so I registered to study nursing here in Perth, and that began my journey. And as soon as I started, I loved it. I just knew that I was in the right profession, caring
It sounds
for
like
people.
you are. Yeah.
Yeah, cleaning up that mess. Loved it. Loved cleaning up the mess.
Okay. Bless you. Bless you.
Yeah.
Some people are called to these things, others are not.
Yes.
But specifically, not just general nursing, eventually you went into, let me see if I pronounce this right, midwifery?
Midwifery,
Okay,
yes.
I got it. Okay. I want to
Yes.
say midwifery, but that's not right.
No, midwifery. It's got nothing to do with being a woman, but it's everything about being with a woman. So it means
While giving
being
birth.
with a woman. Yeah, so several years of working in particularly emergency department.
More blood.
More blood, lots of death, lots of trauma,
Yeah.
and I got to see it all, you know, the beginning of life and the end of life.
Yeah.
But I just kept feeling that tug on my heart to do midwifery, because when I'd started the nursing journey at university, I was doing it because I'd always wanted to do the midwifery part because I loved babies. But then I just got so caught up in the emergency nursing, I thought, I'll just keep doing this. And one day I went to work and I saw a friend studying for her midwifery entry. And God just reminded me, remember, you've got to do your midwifery. And I went home that day and I applied. And so I did my midwifery at King Edward Memorial Hospital here in Perth. So it was 1 year full time. And it just was amazing. I just loved it, looking after pregnant and birthing women. I hadn't had any children of my own then, but at the end of that year, my husband and I decided to, so it was there were two choices, either start a family or pack up and go traveling. And so we decided to pack up everything.
Be adventurous.
We sold our house. We
Wow.
sold up everything, gave away, I remember we gave away our furniture to refugees and got our backpacks, and we went traveling around the world, specifically to developing nations, third world countries.
Did you have a goal in mind or just wanted to see the world?
Just wanted to see the world and see where it led. And, my husband was an engineer. And so he'd been working already for 10 years and he was sort of, tired, not keen to start a family. And so we'd always said we were going to live life with imagination and be adventurous.
And there you go.
And there we went.
Yeah.
Well, that was part one of my conversation with Sara David in Perth, sharing her life journey with us. Next time, we'll hear the amazing ways God leads her and her husband on an overseas trip, and how Sara finally fulfills her desire to help women giving birth, but in a very unexpected location. That's all coming up next time. Meanwhile, you can learn more about Sara's midwifery ministry at her website. It's livingchildinc.org.au. Once again, that's livingchildinc.org.au. Well, until next time, when we'll hear more of Sara's story, I'm Eric Scadabo. So long, and God bless.
You've been listening to Real Faith, and if you have any questions or comments, you can send us a message through our website, realfaith.org.au. That's realfaith.org.au.
Real Faith is a production of Vision Christian Media.
This program is a production of Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, see vision.org.au.